Joshua Clark. Josh, you're very, very welcome. And also we have the Fermanagh Bee Keepers here, Noel McAllister and David Bolton, to talk about their work in the honeybees and wild honeybees and even the queen rear and whatever they can get squeezed in the time that they have, which has been a fascinating piece of work. For maybe those that don't know, my name's Tony Smith and I work for LELP as their education environmental officer. And LELP was set up in 2018 with the key focus was for really conserving and promoting Lough Erne's landscape. And that was look at the unique natural, built and cultural heritage, but also working with the communities that live around the loch. Over the past, since 2018, we've also tried to address some of the ecological issues, but our main focus is about reconnecting communities with their heritage and helping and bringing some social benefits. And it's all about creating links between stakeholders, because we do understand that the longer term goal is about managing our landscape and, and building really a sustainable future for the Lough Erne area. And we sort of have three key objectives within LELP. It's to connect and engage people with their landscape. We also try to improve and protect the biodiversity, but also work on conserving the built heritage, because it is such a wonderful place. We also try to create and improve the physical and the intellectual access to around the loch. So we were trying to make it a better place to live, which I definitely feel has really come along. And finally, it's about, as I said, engaging with communities, I suppose, to really generate the pride in their unique cultural heritage, and really let them involved with it. To date, we've had 47 projects which are being delivered and have been delivered along the shores, and that's all with the communities. And for instance, Joshua in Buglife has partaked in one, which is the Jewels of the Erne, about the two-tone reed beetle and the Zicron reed beetle. We also have Noel and David here from the Fermanagh Bee Keepers, who have worked on the Pollinator project. So all these projects are all a part really of, these two are part of my Lough Erne Young Amateur Naturalist project. So it's really, really good that we have them here to do this. So first of all, to get started, I would love to pass over to Joshua from Buglife, and we'll get it going.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. Tony, just gonna have I done it as a chair? Oh, can you see the screen okay?
Yeah, that's fine, Josh.
Okay, so thanks again then for that introduction. So yeah, today I'm Josh, I'm the conservation officer for Buglife, and I'm going to be sharing about the jewels of Lough Erne. I am from outside of Fermanagh myself, but Fermanagh just holds kind of some incredible landscapes, like the lakes or lochs, the calcareous grasslands and limestone pavements, and all these other habitats are really important here. And this also means that there's some incredible invertebrates that call themselves home here. But Buglife itself is about, their whole thing is about saving invertebrates from extinction. So they generally they'll follow this this theme of no extinction, which is quite hard to say, but basically it's about building room for insects to thrive. So it's been able to reconnect wild areas. So that's wildflower patches, for example, is one thing, but also safe spaces for insects. So no pollutants in our freshwaters, which is a big problem today. You'll probably see some news stories about that, but also friendlier relationships with insects. So they're not creepy crawlies. They do have their own kind of important ecological roles, and they're beneficial in so many ways for people and the environment itself. But then what really is the conservation? What it really is a conservation status? This essentially is it's a measure of the likelihood of a species to become extinct, and this is all based on the available data that we have, as well as expert knowledge. You'll often see, you might hear things like something is vulnerable, something is near threatened, or something is regionally extinct. And this is essentially kind of then the scale that we often sort of are working with. If it's near threatened or vulnerable, we know that there's maybe some issues there. But then if it becomes endangered, critical, then we kind of really need to be getting these conservation projects and going to help kind of maintain, to help that species thrive, but also maintain those sustainable populations of that species so it can kind of continue. We don't want to be seeing it getting into that red zone there where it's critical or regionally extinct, or completely extinct as well. And this is things that we're working against. But we'd often then ask questions in order to characterize these statuses, such as how many hectads is a species present in? Has that species declined from the number that it was historically present in? And generally, what is the state of the habitat itself? There's other conservation statuses like the Northern Ireland Priority Species List, the regional red lists, UK biodiversity or biodiversity action plans, and other things like that. And this is really all just working on conservation of species. But today we are going to be just focusing in on the beetles. There's obviously lots of different taxonomic groups out there, but we're just focusing on specifically one family of beetles today. But just to kind of explore the beetles of Ireland, based on Ireland's beetle checklist. There's over 2,000 species of beetles currently on the checklist, and this is spread across 84 families. Some of our most or ones that we might know and love are, for example, the ladybirds. But currently on the checklist, there's 27 species of ladybirds in Ireland. This includes the 22 spot, the eyed ladybird, and then one of my favorites there, which is the top left-hand corner, which is the larch ladybird. And there's just a lot of different varieties out there. There's even some ladybirds that are hairy, and there's just a lot of biodiversity out there. We also have then weevils, people might know them, and they'll have their own the ecological functions and roles. And then something that we'll see on flowers often are the soldier beetles, and they can be pollinators actually, but they will eat pollen and nectar. You often find them just kind of resting or feasting on plants. And there's 27 different species of those. Just to look at a few more, we do have scar beetles as well, part of the Scarbidae family. What the big green one there is the rose chafer beetle, and it's quite impressive. It's only found at, as far as I believe, 2 sites in Ireland, so on the County Down coast, as well as down in the Burn. As far as I'm aware, there might be a few other sites, but those are the ones that spring to mind. But then our largest family are the rove beetles. There's over 640 species of them in Ireland. You might have heard of the devil's coach horse, which is one of the larger ones, and it's quite a fun species to run across. And then click beetles as well. But then getting really to it, the leaf beetles, or the Chrysomelidae. This is the family of beetles that has over 150 species in Ireland, and some of them that you might already know, the green dock beetle, or just to tell specifically a bit about the leaf beetles, is that they're often associated with a plant for its whole life cycle. So, for example, the green dock beetle, it's associated with dock leaves. You'll see it. They're these like little small green beetles, and you'll see them all over the dock leaves, and they stay at that for their whole life cycle. And then we also have some of my favorite is the tortoise beetles, from the subfamily Cassinidae. And these are associated, they're also associated with their own plants, but specifically the noble tortoise beetle, Cassida nobilis, it's associated in salt marsh habitat, and associated with the saltbush or the oraches. I believe I've actually never heard that said out loud before, but they're only associated with those type of plants. But For this project, we're focusing in on the subfamily of Donacia, and these are known as the reed beetles, and many of them are of conservation interest, and that's because they are associated with freshwater wetland habitats and the marginal vegetation that's associated with them, like reeds, sedges, and things. And that's where they're then called the reed beetles. Their larva is often found submerged underwater. They'll be like kind of at the roots, and then that's kind of where they'll start growing and then pupating. And then the adults, they'll feed and reproduce on the vegetation above water, and they may also travel between flowers, collecting nectar and pollen. But then you'll then hear the term jewels of the reeds, and that's because these beetles can be quite fancy in color. They've got these impressive metallic colors. Some are blue, red, and we'll soon see the one that's all rainbow colored. But these are all incredible species. They do show diversity even within species themselves. Like this species I can't actually remember if it's got a common name, but it's called Pollinators ceracea. It's got about 5 or so different color forms. There's reds, blues, greens, yellows, and they're quite impressive. There is actually currently debate that there might be two species there, but that's currently ongoing. But then this is why they are of conservation importance, specifically because of their freshwater habitat. They are sensitive indicators of the quality of this habitat, and they'll be very sensitive to pollution, drainage, overgrazing, scrub encroachment, and invasive species. And these are all big massive issues in the conservation world. On Ireland's Red List of water beetles, which was published in 2009, one of these Donacia beetles were listed as regionally extinct. So it is present elsewhere in the world, but in Ireland it's no longer present. But then 2 more are considered vulnerable, and that's really a big issue, and it's why this project was quite important to tackle. But generally, so then again, these are like these species are in our wetland habitats, and these are essentially wetlands. You can describe them as areas where they're with permanently water saturated soil, and the water and it'll have a certain water level to it as well, up to a certain point, and this can be either flowing fresh water, brackish or saline water, salt water, so that includes like salt marshes. But we also another important wetland habitat is going to be like the peatlands, which is globally important for carbon sequestration as well, which is under threat from things like drainage, forestry, agriculture, and industry. But back then to our freshwater ones, we have our swamps, our reed beds, our marshes, fens, wet woodlands. And these are all situated near our rivers and lochs. And as you know, Fermanagh is known as the lakelands, and it does, at least I believe I have heard it called that. And it's because of just the amount of kind of this type of habitat that is present, which is why Fermanagh tends to attract these beetles. The wetlands themselves, they can differ in terms of the depth of the standing water and vegetation type. Marshes, as an example, are going to be dominated by sedges, rushes, and some tall herbs as well. But if the soil isn't permanently saturated, it then is going to be considered a wet meadow, which isn't a true wetland, as its soil won't be fully saturated throughout the year. But we do have about 19 species across 3 genera in this subfamily. We've got the Microplea, the Platymerus, and then the Donacia genera. And this then includes our 2 target species, the Zicron Reed Beetle, Donacia aquatica, and then the 2-tone reed beetle, Donacia bicolora. And you can see that the Zicron Reed Beetle is an incredible sort of beetle. It's got this rainbow colored sort of external features there, the elytron or the wing cases, and it's generally an impressive beetle, and it's it's again, it's one of the jewels of Lough Erne. It's an incredible species. Basically, it was only found in one site in northern Ireland, or in Ireland, in Upper Lough Erne in Ishvindra, and it's incredible that a species is present. It turns out that this is actually then one of the strongholds for this species. We also have the two-tone reed beetle, and it's another case where we do have the stronghold for this population as well. And this is an incredible golden colored beetle. But so the Jewels of Lough Erne project, it's something that came about between Buglife and Lough Erne landscape partnership, where we all work together with funding from the lottery, the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And this was basically just a chance to monitor populations and historic sites for these rare and threatened beetles, to find new records, hopefully, of the Zicron Reed beetle, and then to provide management recommendations to encourage these populations at appropriate sites, but also really just to get the local community involved to help find these jewels in the reeds. The foundations of this project were all kind of laid out previously by Brian Elson, John Walsh, and Garth Foster in their 2007 checklist of these Irish beetles, really just kind of laying out the foundations. So the Zicron Reed beetle, I mean, you can see a map there of its distribution, with the outlier kind of being up in Upper Lough Erne, but a few further sites too. And it's kind of it was last actually recorded in 1999, I believe. I don't think there was a further record. And really, this project was to try to find more of these beetles out there. For the UK population, or the British population, it's almost decreased, or it has decreased by over 80% due to agricultural intensification, industrialization, as well as just the successional change in the habitat itself, where it and then becomes more wooded. And this then kind of, we'll see later with some of the results of how this kind of removes the habitat, or the appropriate habitat for the species. This species is listed as a Northern Ireland priority species. It is also vulnerable on the red list in Ireland, and it's then listed as rare in the red data book too in Great Britain. But general causes of its decline, as I've just mentioned, with the agricultural intensification, this leads to often eutrophication, the loss of marginal sedge beds, which is the plants that it prefers, and various issues like that. These are just an example of some of its host plants, which is going to be the lesser pond sedge, the bladder sedge, and bottle sedge, which are just a few examples. They will go to a few other things too, but these require a base-rich marshes of ponds and swamps. And if this habitat is lost, the species is lost too. The two-tone reed beetle, again, it's another beautiful beetle. It's completely golden in color. It's also our largest, I believe, beetle in, or not largest beetle, but the largest of this subfamily. And it's got a weird distribution across Ireland, in the sense that it is where it is found, it can be found quite in good numbers. And this then provides a strange, and often, I suppose, rarish phenomenon, where we actually have the stronghold for this population. It's not doing too well in England or Scotland or Wales. But here we seem to have a good population of them. But this also means that it's a very important population. We need to make sure we don't lose it, as this may become one of the last remaining sites for them. But again, it's similar issues to the Zicron Reed beetle that it's facing, such as intensified agriculture and waterway pollution. Those are really the big issues. But yeah, so its plant, or its host plant, is going to be the branched burr reed. And if you can find this, you're likely to find it as well, the species as well. And yeah, that's just an example of what it looks like there. And it's a Northern Ireland priority species. It isn't listed on the Irish red list, but that's just due to its population being quite for this geographic region, it's quite decent, but that doesn't mean that doesn't relegate its conservation value there. It requires the habitat to be there for it to do well. But we also have then lots of other species out there. So these are just examples of those species that can be found in Fermanagh. But there are a few more that have been included here. So we've got the Donacia clavipes and then marginata, and basically all the species there. They will have preference for other species of reeds and sedges. But for example, the one at the bottom left-hand corner there, Donacia crassipes, it is also the water lily reed beetle, and it'll be found more in the open water where water lilies are. And often if you are out surveying for it, you'll see it kind of just fly past you. But it's another beautiful species. It's kind of got this like dark blue coat, or not coat, but wing case to it. But also if you look closely, it's got these golden spots between them all. So it's quite an interesting species. But then there's other species that can be found in lower, where we are focusing in Upper Lough Erne, but in Lower Lough Erne there's another species that is also listed as vulnerable, the hairy reed beetle. But again, the focus is on Upper Lough Erne today. So specifically, the corner of Upper Lough Erne is around the Galoon Island SSI. This area was designated for the extent and quality of its grasslands that transition from open water to swamp zone to fen and then into wet meadow, with a diverse plant life and associated fauna. Although other areas could be considered, the Zicron Reed Beetle was again last recorded within this SSI at Inishfrendra. And again, it requires that kind of important swamp zone vegetations. Looking closer into this survey zone, we can see the different habitats and partitioning of the farmland close to the river, with one concern being for the agriculture pollution. There's a lot of fields nearby. And again, then here's just kind of a rough outline of the different habitat types that are present here, with the darker areas being more characterized as a swamp, then into fen, and if grazed, a transition into wet grassland. The swamp zone may be dominated by common reed and common clubrush. The fen, with sedges being the main component, species like the tufted sedge and bottle sedge, which is one of the important ones, and herbs like cowbean and greater water parsnip. Some areas of the survey also included wet woodland, which is its own important feature of this SSI, important for other invertebrates, but maybe not as important for the reed beetles themselves. And this is why we need a mosaic of habitats to cater for all these different species and the requirements. The main survey sites were Crom Estate, Galoon Island, and Inishfrendra, just highlighted by these coloured points there. And these had to be accessed by canoe, or not all of them, but most of them some of them had to be accessed by canoe, and then surveyed once at site to survey through swoop netting, which really is the preferred method. You can search the roots of the plants for the aquatic larvae, but obviously that's going to be destructive to the habitat, which we don't want. So really, we're looking for the adults during their survey, during their active period. The surveys were conducted in 2021. They were originally meant for the year before, but regrettably, due to the various lockdowns that happened, this caused delays with, I think, specifically gaining site access permissions, which this did lead then to our biggest challenge, which was missing the peak the peak survey period for the Zicron Reed Beetle, which is actually in May, and surveying then taking place between the end of May and July. And this was kind of a bit of a problem. I should mention that this survey itself was a pilot study, and we can learn really kind of a lot from it. But basically then, just to jump into our results. So due to our late start, again, the Zicron Reed Beetle was not found during this pilot study, but that does not mean that nothing was found, just that we need to do some further monitoring. Other species have definitely been found. just so to start, we did split up the survey sites into different areas. So at Crom Estate, we had the old Crom Castle ruins, and this is characterized by reed beds, fens, wet meadow, and was generally considered favourable in terms of the species and habitats present for our targets, although none of those were found. But in saying that, 4 different other reed beetles were found, and that includes Donacia marginata, Thalasina, as well as the 2 species of Pluramoris, Cerasea and Discolor. And there is one slight issue with the site where it is at risk at the spread of coarse grass species such as the common reed, and there's also an unknown grazing regime, which kind of provides a uncertainty there. We then went to Turf House, and it is a largely unsuitable for the targets due to a lakeshore that is shaded out by trees, with the vegetation being mostly grasses and shrubs rather than the needed sedges or reeds. But despite this, we did actually find a 2-tone reed beetle, and further Donacia simplex was also found, and that's again just represented by these pictures. So even though the habitat wasn't necessarily favorable for the 2-tone reed beetle, we did actually find it, which just shows kind of the importance of this area of Fermanagh. It would be highlighted then that really the site mightn't be the best for a conservation priority, because again the wet woodlandy sort of habitat is its own feature of the ASSI, and then those invertebrates off that habitat should be catered to. Lastly, for the Crom Estate site, we did have Inishirk Island, and again it has like some similarities with the previous area. But there was a large open section of grassland, fen and reed, though again most of it was shaded out by wet woodland. But we did find 3 species of reed beetles here, which was good going. At the Galoon Island, we split this into 2 main survey sites. The first section contained reeds, or contained a reed bed, and fen, wet meadow, and there was then a bit of scrub as well. But it generally appeared suitable for both of the target species, with the reeds progressing into an area of fen with sedges. There was no Zicron, but we did again find a 2-tone reed beetle and 4 other species of reed beetles. We did also find another rare beetle. It wasn't one of these species, but it was another Chrysomelody, so it was within that same kind of family, but a different subfamily, which is the skullcap beetle, which is really generally considered scarce in Ireland. So this was actually quite good to find. This area does have some low intensity grazing, which is really good for helping to maintain a species rich fen vegetation and a diverse sward structure, which is good. The second section also appeared suitable for both, but just one or just 3 of the species were found, and none of the 4 species were found, but none of our target species were. There's generally kind of a threat of nutrient enrichment at the site from adjacent fields, where there does appear to be areas of intensively grazed grassland nearby, and that's kind of one concern for the area. The last one then was probably the one with the most excitement or perhaps tension for our species, due to being the last previous site for the Zicron Reed Beetle. But again, due to late start, we didn't find the Zicron itself. But this site was also split in 2. The first site had most potential with reeds, progressing into an area of fen with sedges, including bottle sedge that the Zicron would use, but it wasn't found before other species were recorded here. The second site was probably one of the most diverse in terms of the reed beetle assemblage. It had a narrow belt of reeds and rushes along a fence line with patches of branched burr reed, which is for the 2-tone reed beetle. But generally, pretty much a lot of the species were found at this site. So this was quite a good area. But generally then, just for conservation recommendations for, or at least what was found and what we can gather, we would we want to retain kind of the interest of the fen and swamp communities that might be susceptible to successional changes. So we need to really consider the grazing regimes, any scrub management that might be needed. We also want to kind of protect these areas from kind of excessive disturbance, whether it's from motorized vehicles and things where that might disturb the reeds themselves. And then we also generally want to kind of consider the physical characteristics of the habitat. Like, is there any slope into it? Can we improve this or not? But also the habitat themselves will be also beneficial for other taxonomic groups like breeding waders. And we really need to factor all this in when we're considering any conservation plans. One of the biggest ones then is really just targeted thinning of the common reed. This species can kind of overcome quite a lot of the other species. It can sort of become quite thick and dense, and really kind of become problematic for species. And there can be dense areas kind of finding these. And really, if we with targeted thinning of these reeds, as they do have their place, but targeted thinning, we can kind of help provide that area for the reed beetles themselves, or the diverse variety of reed beetles that are out there. We also kind of highlighted some areas of pond creation. I probably should have highlighted in slightly better color there, but basically those two blue spots at Gloon Island and in Shendra are areas of potential pond creation. These were either areas that might have had historic ponds in the past, but they have been highlighted now as a site that may benefit a number of the reed beetles, including the Zicron Reed Beetle. We also have areas where drains for drain blockage to prevent the drying out of these really important wetland habitats that are really generally of global importance. And these are just some of the areas highlighted for that. As it is the Lough Erne itself, it does depend on a good flow of water to maintain the quality of the water, and it is really generally tends to be sensitive to disturbance. And we really need to kind of consider where these sites are based, the quality of the inflows, such as the River Erne, which in terms of its quality was considered moderate as one of the primary inflows, and as well as then was a few of the tributaries which were provided a poor rating in terms of the quality of the water, which is really detrimental to kind of just the Lough Erne kind of landscape there, where we want to obviously maintain it in good quality for the diverse range of species that are present there. But we can then learn from other areas that have tackled pollution issues, like the Ballinderry Rivers Trust, and these are kind of generally just things that help kind of really improve the quality. But yeah, this is just a pilot study. Then if you want to help out, if you go out on kayaks, canoes, you can really look out and record these species, and you can submit your records to CEDAR or the National Biodiversity Data Center. And these will really help kind of know where these species are. But again, if you are doing this, to follow the water safety guidelines. But some quick ID tips is to really to know what time of year it is. For example, if it's May and you are near bladder sedge or those type of sedges, it might be a Zicron Reed Beetle. But if it's later in the year, it could be one of these other species, or if it's in different vegetation, it might be a different species too. But also its general morphology doesn't look like one of these species there, as well as where exactly you find it. But then if you are in doubt, send us a picture or tweet us, and we will help you out. But then just some thank yous and acknowledgement. I just want to thanks to Anna Hart, who is the previous person in this role who actually conducted the surveys themselves and helped design the project. But also, of course, Lough Erne Landscape Partnership, for the provision of support all the way through from the project to providing canoes and outreach events, such as the Share Discovery School Village, the RSPB and National Trust for some site access, and also then the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which obviously provided the funding, which is crucial for this work. These are just some references, and yeah, that's me for this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. That was amazing. I really enjoyed that. I'd heard so much about it because I only came late into the Jewels of the Erne, but when you really sit and listen to it there firsthand, They're amazing little beetles, you know, and it's something now that I'm going to be looking for more when I'm out, especially in these wetlands. We spend a lot of time up round Crom, so it's something that we could definitely do with the young people, and spend a bit of time then looking at doing surveys. But thank you very much. I have put a wee note on in the chat thread that if anybody has any questions, they can put them in there, and then what we can do then is at the very end we can just have all the questions together and move it on from there. Is that okay? So thank you, Josh. So now I would like to hand over to Noel and David from the Fermanagh Bee Keepers.
Okay, thank you, Tony. David, if you could do the needful with the presentation, that'd be good. It strikes me that there is, David, you're muted, so I can't actually hear.
That's okay. Just still trying to get you on the screen here. Hold on a second now. Let's try one more time.
Listening to Joshua, it strikes me just how many crossovers there are in terms of the problems that we are facing, whether it be bees or bugs or whatever. It's all about the environment that we are creating as human beings. If we could do without the human beings, the bugs and the bees would do very well.
Give me a second here. Sorry, just trying to. I've got a new computer and it's misbehaving. Let's see now. Talk amongst yourselves for a minute.
Sorry for ran over time there a little bit. I didn't see a clock there, but I now see it.
It's great to see somebody who is really interested and involved with their subject, Josh.
Right. Okay, I think we're maybe getting there now. Hold on a second now. Let's see if we can get this to work. So share screen. And there's no, tell me if you see anything coming up there.
Yes, coming up now, Dave.
Good. Okay. Right. Okay, Noel, go ahead then.
Okay, can you make it full screen?
I can, yeah, sure, yeah. Why is that there?
There we are. That's just perfect.
Sorry about that, folks.
Okay, welcome everybody to the discussion. David and I will run through. David actually created the presentation, but was unsure of how to be able to make it this evening. So we have to work between us. And fortunately, David's other meeting was cancelled at the last minute, so he's able to join us. So David, if you move to the next screen, then I can talk through it. Okay, just before we start, I know Joshua did the same, and we have lots of people to thank. The Lough Erne Landscape Partnership have been very much involved with lots of projects that we have been doing over this past while. Obviously, the money came originally from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The Eva Crane Trust have been very helpful to us in terms of some of the project work we have been doing. Live Here, Love Here, and Men's Sheds have also been involved. The National Trust entertain us and look after us when it comes to placing hives that you'll hear all about, as do RSPB. We have also a relationship with Temple Manor, who we discovered had some really old wild bees, and we have been trying to utilize that resource. And there are lots of other local woodland owners who have allowed us to use their lands. Thank you, David. Just about wild honeybees, we want to look at our wild honeybees different from those that live in the beekeepers' hives. Where will they live? Why are they so important? And what is the Fermanagh Bee Keepers Association doing to support the wild honeybee population? Thanks, David. Something about our honeybees. One of many pollinators upon which our flowers and trees and a lot of crops depend. Honeybees Apis mellifera, are only one of the species. There are far more, like hundreds of different solitary bees that are pollinating. But the difference is that honeybees are a very large population in a colony. One of the few insect species that live in colonies with different classes of bees, also performing different functions on the colony. And we'll talk a wee bit more about that later. Came to Ireland probably at the end of the Ice Age. Obviously, we weren't there. We can't be exactly sure of the date, or possibly brought by early humans who arrived between 7,000 and 8,000 years ago. When we're training new beekeepers, we always say to them, you know, the bees were doing all this without us for thousands of years before we arrived from Africa or wherever we came from. The main subspecies of honeybee is the North European dark bee, Apis mellifera marifera. And it was thought for many years, and certainly in my training in the early 90s, we were told that the original dark bees in Ireland, the Irish black bee, had all died out in the 1920s and 30s, but that has proven not to be the case. Recent research has revealed that the Irish strain to be both pure and distinct, and the only remaining population of the Apis mellifera subspecies in Northern Europe to be surviving intact. Thank you, David. There are, of course, as Joshua pointed out, lots of pressures on honeybees. In the last 25 years, we had the arrival of a parasite called Varroa destructor. At work, I was taught in finance that globalization was a fantastic thing, and that it would change all our markets and things would flow so much better. You can order a honeybee from Italy in the post and it'll arrive about a week later in a wee envelope. You can even arrange with the post office to go early in the morning and pick up that envelope with a nice new queen, mated queen, so that you can start a hive of whatever strain of bee is in the post to you. That is all very fine, but that bee might well arrive with all sorts of problems, diseases. But some years ago, somebody imported honeybees, probably queens, from elsewhere, and a parasite called Varroa destructor, which is very well named, arrived with it. Within a period of 8 to 10 years, the Varroa destructor had infected hives all throughout Ireland, and there would be no areas of Ireland that aren't infected with Varroa destructor at the present time. There are lots of other well-known diseases that puts pressure on the bees, and we have, of course, the environmental pressures. Loss of habitat, which Joshua alluded to, loss of foraging, and the use of pesticides and herbicides. Pesticides are one of the areas that beekeepers generally would have some influence on government to try and stop, but herbicides, it's becoming more clear, will also have an effect over time. We really need a different regime where the chemicals that we're putting on land, on plants, need to be properly tested for lots of insects and lots of animals that surround us. Thanks, David. So are wild honeybees different from those that live in beekeepers' hives? Well, yes, they are there on their own. They're not being fed by human beings. They're not being treated to keep any parasites out or diseases. And if they have survived, it's purely through Darwinian theory that over a period of time, there is natural selection going on, and they have managed to come through that. As David has said in this slide, humans select for the traits they desire. Human beings, as beekeepers, want bees that are nice and quiet, docile, that don't sting them all the time, but that will produce a reasonable honey crop at the end of the year. Nature selects the traits that will survive in the long term, and we could learn a lot more from nature than we actually do. Thank you, David. So where do wild colonies live? Well, we have a picture here of, this was a colony that I think it was David that captured the picture, but basically in trees and openings like this, quite a lot of work has been done by Professor Tom Seeley of Cornell University around what is the ideal size that bees would prefer to live in, and what does it look like in terms of insulation and What about how they would choose to live if they were left to their own devices? And that has been very helpful. We had a number of Zoom calls with Professor Seeley during COVID, and it was interesting just to engage with the technology. A wee beekeeping society in the back end of Fermanagh, able to have one of the leading lights in beekeeping, Professor Seeley, talking to us for a couple of hours on beekeeping from his living room. Thank you, David. As you can see, the hive, if bees are left to their own devices, the hive will look quite different. They will build it in a certain way. For those of you who have seen inside a beekeeping hive, as we would keep it as beekeepers, it's not that far away in terms of how it looks, but we would refer to that as wild comb. The standard is just the same. There will be approximately a 9mm gap between the way they build the honeycomb, so that they can get up and down, and they will lay brood in there and they will store honey in there. Thanks, David. So why are they important? Honeybees are a sentinel species. There's lots of things in books about when the bees go, humans will not be far behind. Habitat loss, they will show very quickly that habitat needs to be improved. Agriculture and forestry practices, we speak regularly to district council, to agricultural people in the area. I was at a group of retired farmers today, and it is about, what chemicals are you using? What time of day are you using the chemicals? Would it be possible, if there are beekeepers in the area, to allow the beekeeper to lock the bees in for the morning, that you have to use these chemicals? And by the way, do you know how dangerous the chemicals you're using are? And what sort of controls do you have? Are you absolutely sure that you yourself are well enough protected by handling and breathing in these chemicals? Varroa destructor, in terms of what it is, it's in every hive in Ireland and the UK and across Europe. If you like to think of a dinner plate on your chest, and that dinner plate has large spikes which penetrate through your ribs, it gives you some idea of what Varroa destructor would be like on a bee. Those spikes go in through the ribs, and the Varroa destructor feeds on the blood of the bee and weakens the colonies, and weakens the bee and the colonies in the long term. Unfortunately, as the spikes come through the rib cage of the bee, through the skeleton, they also inject a lot of diseases and other problems for the bee while that is happening. Local honey is something that is in great demand as people become more aware of the environment, and they look at some of the coloured liquid which is being sold by the supermarkets, and it's got the label honey. You should look at the labels, or you should even just taste it and compare it with what is available from local beekeepers, and you'll be able to tell the difference from the look and the taste within minutes. So we'll move on to, and David will take it from here, around what are Fermanagh Bee Keepers doing to support the wild bee honey population in our area. So over to David for a wee minute.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And Josh, I really enjoyed your talk, very interesting. And I find myself rummaging around Crum from time to time on 2 different projects. So it's nice to hear about your work in that area in particular. And lovely to hear that we've got some real treasures here as well. That's terrific. This will be a familiar sign to you. I hopefully you've seen several of them around Fermanagh. It was part of the Magnificent Meadow project, and I think it has had some attention. Our local newspapers picked it up, and certainly I think the message has got across, not just locally here, but also more widely, that it's a good thing not to be cutting meadows or marginal grasses, grounds that don't need to be cut. And in fact, if anything, both COVID and the pressure on public expenditure has been a benefit here. I noticed that our verges this year, just 1 metre cut and the rest was left, and it was done much later than normal as well. The other thing we've been doing is trying to increase habitat. So this is an example of a traditional hay meadow. Again, Ulster Wildlife sowed this, You can see buttercup here, but also the slightly lime green colored flowers are yellow rattle. And yellow rattle, as most of you will know, is very important, very important in suppressing the vigor of grasses and other plants, and allows then the wildflowers to come through. And certainly, I was in the meadow this year, and the butterflies in it were just absolutely amazing. As you walked along, the butterflies just literally flew up in their dozens in front of you. And it's interesting, on this particular meadow, I don't see too many honeybees, but I see lots of other pollinators. And I think there's something here about making sure that we provide the right range of habitats for the right range of pollinators. So to say a little bit about our project, the Wild Bee Project, it's a project we've undertaken starting in 2018. And we aim to do it over 5 years to see if we could achieve a number of objectives, which I'll come to in a moment. And but ultimately it was in response to that point that Noel said earlier on, whereas we thought that the wild bee populations had died out following the arrival of Varroa in this part of the world about 25 years ago, we found, in fact, over the years that indeed was not the case. And also that wild colonies were surviving, whereas beekeepers were actually treating their colonies with pharmacological witch's brews to try and defeat the Varroa. So there was something for us to take notice of here. So our aims were to put up these boxes, which I'll come to in a moment, to increase nesting sites, and then by monitoring the sites to see what works best in terms of the best type of box that would support the wild bee population. And if we were successful in attracting swarms into these boxes, then to use these reservoirs, these colonies of wild bees that had learned how to live with Varroa, to the male bees within the drones within the colonies would be used to mate our virgin queens, which we were breeding, and Noel will talk about that in a moment. And then just to see how the wild colony survived over time. So we built these wild bee boxes, and about 40 litres. Over time, I've moved the entrance from the top down to the bottom because the bees seem to prefer that. We put in some old comb and maybe some lemongrass oil to try and attract swarms. And also I'd scorch the inside because bees seem to be attracted to a void, like a hollow of a tree that had been scorched by fire. So we put up so far 17 of these, and I'll say more about that in a moment. To about half a dozen of them, I've added this sensor. This is a sensor that's used to track food as it's in transit from one place to another. So if apples are dispatched from Spain, then one of these sensors will be part of the package, and it will track the temperature, etc., as the goods are on their way. So these sensors take humidity and temperature readings. They're sitting in a void at the top of the box. So you're looking into the top of the box here. The little mesh screens off a hole which is directly above where the bee brood will be. So it's a very stable temperature location. And then this box is then filled with an insulation like wood shavings, for example, and that then minimize the heat loss to the colony as a whole, and again keeps the sensor in a fairly stable situation. We download this data, by the way, and I'll show you some of the pictures in a moment. This is a Stevenson screen in which we have a sensor placed to give us the ambient or background temperatures against which we compare the data coming from the boxes, and you'll see a couple of beehives in the background here. The box locations, we've got 17 up at the moment, and this is just not a very good graph, but you get an idea. Ignore the purple circles with numbers in them. It's the red triangles or the red thingamabobbers that are roughly where the locations are. And you can see we've got 2 in Crum. I was delighted to see that this year the 2 boxes we placed there right at the beginning of the project in 2018-19 were occupied for the first time this summer. Again, a tribute to the month of June. We have one on an island on Lower Lough Erne. And again, thanks very much to the RSPB for helping us both get the box out there, but also monitoring it. So far, no bees in there yet, but the hope was that given a relatively isolated situation on a large island, there's a good chance that there might be wild bees there, which have not been crossbred with other subspecies. This is just one of the boxes going up. And we used every means by hauling them up by rope or using a tractor like this to put them up. This is one up. This is one of the first ones I put up actually, and it's been up now since 2018. It's called like my pilot box. And then this is one of the National Trust ones in Florence Court. Both of those are occupied. The first one being occupied within 11 days of the box going up. And then this is an unusual one in the sense that all the others are mounted high up. Some are in trees, mostly. This one's on the ground. And again, it's just an attempt to try and see, would these work on the ground? This box been in place now since about 2019-20. So far, no bees, although we've had scout bees around it. Scout bees showing an interest ahead of a swarm, but the swarm went somewhere else. So this is just a little video of the arrival of swarm in the first box that I showed you. So you see all the bees assembling and beginning to cluster around the entrance at the top of the box. Sorry about the dramatic camera movements. You hear the swallows in the background, not very happy. So you can see literally thousands of bees swilling around and all moving very rapidly. Within about 5 to 10 minutes, they will all have gone into the box. It's really it's a force of nature, something to behold, and it just happened to be there when they arrived. This is a readout from one of the boxes. The blue line is the ambient temperature taken from the Stevenson screen, and then we have the black line is the readout from one of the boxes, and you can see how the sudden jump in temperature there indicating that a swarm moved in. And a couple of other interesting things to observe. This is, by the way, each peak is a day and each dip is a night. So day, night, right through the month of June here. You notice that on around the 2nd of June, there's a little spike. That's almost certainly down to scout bees going in to check out the box. So they elevated the temperature a little bit. The next day, they didn't come back very much. But then on the 4th of June, then the swarm moved in, and then you get this very high level of activity, which throughout the day and night. And what I discovered was that they moved in beside a sycamore tree, which was in full bloom, and they literally worked day and night to bring in as much nectar as they could throughout the first week or so that the colony was in place. And here's another example just to show you that the first one wasn't a fluke. Same idea again. You can see the scout bees there at the very start. We've got a relationship now with the Native Irish Honeybee Society. And was at this point I was going to hand back to you, Noel, or do you want me to continue?
Yes, I can talk a wee bit, David, about the Native Irish Honeybee Society. I think the next slide.
Yeah, okay.
Their aims and objectives. In 2012, a group of interested beekeepers across Ireland, and based on research that had been done and the discovery that the native bees hadn't really died out totally, it was a group of beekeepers in 2012 who decided to come together and form what is called the Native Irish Honeybee Society. And their aims and objects are, and that's a bit of it, to promote the conservation, study, improvement and reintroduction of Apis mellifera throughout the island of Ireland. To establish conservation areas throughout the island was also one of their objectives. Prior to that, it was quite common for bees to be imported either from France or from Italy and whatever into the island of Ireland. And we had problems in that quite a few bees are still here, but that from 2012 onwards, it became obvious with the research that was done in Galway for us, that what we had was a good cohort of bees, the original black bees, and we could concentrate on that and take actions that would create more of an established colony in the island of Ireland and try and protect it. If we could produce enough bees from that research or from that work to prevent the necessity to import bees, then that would really help us. We have, Fermanagh Bee Keepers have for quite a number of years, certainly since I've been involved in 2008, been trying to use, to move towards using only locally adapted AMM bees. We didn't know it at the time that there were still pure bred bees still in the area, but they had an influence. So we would have also always tried to use locally adapted bees at all, if that was at all possible, and to not import stock. It's better to work with bees drawn from the native population that thrive in the climatic conditions around us. If you take somebody dressed in a t-shirt, shorts and open-toed sandals from the middle of Italy somewhere and plunk them down on a wet Fermanagh November day, you can understand how bees being imported isn't a particularly good idea if you want the bees to be happy and to thrive in that area. The findings from Galway University that we have a unique population of the North European dark bee means that we have something to treasure and protect, and that is what the Native Irish Honey Bee Society is all about. There is a real risk of bringing in diseases such as the small hive beetle, which hasn't arrived here yet. And we have the historic examples around the importation and the globalization of this world that we live in, that things are possible to do, but they may not be a good idea. Recent examples include Varroa in the bee population, and ash dieback is a blazing flag, if you want one, for the whole idea of not importing stuff that isn't properly tested. We therefore think it's a bad idea to bring in colonies or queens from GB, Europe, or other parts of the world. And that is something that the Native Irish Honey Bee Society are successfully working at over time. So Fermanagh Bee Keepers is one of a number of associations across Ireland that is undertaking a queen rearing programme to build up the quality of our managed honeybee population. The Native Irish Honey Bee Society provide us with high quality tested queens at the start of the season, and they teach us how to raise queens from those stock. Also, we are placing the virgin queens in pristine locations where they can be mated with wild drones, which will hopefully bring together the best of what beekeepers have selected for and the suitability of the wild and the survivability of the wild population. It's quite a big project, and it does take a lot of manpower. It also really does bring on the skills of the beekeepers involved, in that they are for the first time breeding queens themselves, and from the stock that we are supplied with, we are trying
Hello. We've lost Noel, I think, have we?
I think so.
Okay, well, I'll continue then on Noel's thoughts until he joins us again. What this is actually at the apiary taken last year. One of our beekeepers, Thomas, here in the white bee suit, is using the little red tool that he has in his hand there to take eggs from the frame, which is in front of him, and then putting those eggs, which are literally pinhead size, into the little cups on the other frame on the left of the screen. And then that frame is then put into a hive that's been specially prepared, and the queens will draw out, the bees, a big part, will draw out queen cells. And a queen cell looks like this after the bees have done their magic, and that all happens within a few days after placing those little plastic cups into the beehives. And then that frame, which you saw on the left of the screen there, turns like to be like this after the bees have done their magic. So what you see here are the in behind those little bundles of bees, you can see the queen cells have been created, and inside each of those queen cells there's a new queen being born or being raised, and they will hatch out after about 16 days or maybe less. We take those little artificially created cells and put them into incubators. Then the queen hatches out, and then the queens are then put into little mini hives and placed in areas where they can be mated. And we, as I said earlier on, we select areas where we know there are wild colonies in particular, or as in my own apiary here, because I've managed to get swarms from wild colonies, I'm fairly confident that my bees have a strong resilient strain to Varroa. In fact, I haven't treated my bees for quite some time, for some years, and I don't suffer any greater losses than any other beekeeper for that. So that brings us to the end. I'm sorry Noel dropped off the end there. I wonder if he can join us again. But thank you again. Thanks for your interest and your attendance to this part of the presentation, and also to the Lough Erne Partnership for creating the opportunity this evening, and indeed for all the support that we've received from the partnership throughout the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And Noel, like I said to you at the last week, it was just fascinating to hear the passion that you have for beekeeping, but so much so the wild bee project, and even then to go on to tell us about the queen rearing project and how you are moving that forward. It's as a partnership and LELP, we're very proud to have you as a partner in this, and it's hopefully when LELP's gone, the Fermanagh Bee Keepers are still only going to go from strength to strength, and I think that's going to be the way forward for everybody.
Thank you, Tony.
There was no questions. Is there any questions from the floor now, without going through the chat? I've really, there's so much information to take in from Joshua and David now. It's just been absolutely brilliant, and I think I could be speaking for everybody here. The passion from the three of you in your own specific line of work is just amazing, and it came through from all three of you. I think it's brilliant. We have a question. So for David, are you looking to put more sites to put up bee boxes, David?
Yes, thanks, Mark. I've always overloaded with boxes because the amount of work involved, actually, I've got to monitor these boxes, especially the ones that don't have sensors in them, about 4 times a year to make at different stages throughout the year to try and establish if colonies moved in. So I'd love to have 100 boxes up across the county, and there's huge parts of the county that where we don't have boxes, and I'd really love to see if we have bees living there and so on. Like you think about, for example, the uplands beyond Derrigonley out towards Garrison. I don't think we have any beekeepers there. It'd be wonderful to know if there's any bees living in that part of the world, etc., etc. But anyway, if you're interested in having a box, give me a shout and we'll come to an arrangement. But if you're asking me for 10 more for your town land, I think that's not on.
Excellent. Well, anybody else? Oh, there's loads of black bees up there.
Well, that's very good.
Excellent.
Very good.
Well, I might just check out a question there. So, like, that was a really the passion and stuff for the product is really good, and your talk was great. I just wondered, did any like sort of recording of species around these sites? So, any other species that are present, kind of in those habitats, or have you seen any changes or anything? Is that something that is done? Is one question.
Right. Well, I'm not an entomologist, and I wouldn't have the wherewithal to do that, although I would dearly love to do it. I suppose the closest I would get to is just observing the butterflies populations in those areas, and that I don't record it necessarily, although I did take part in the butterfly, big butterfly count there recently. The thing that I think we want to try and do is, I personally would be quite anxious that we as beekeepers don't overpopulate an area with honeybees, because I think both research but logic would tell you that if you do that, then you're going to displace other pollinators, or possibly create hunger gaps for other pollinators. Now, having said that, if we lived in a situation, for example, where we had rapeseed oil or huge, acres and acres and acres of orchards, then you could see the place for high density of honeybee or bumblebee colonies in certain situations. But in the kind of mixed arable, pastoral landscape that we've got, I don't think there's a place for high densities of honeybees in any given situation. So that's one point. The second point then is that we don't, the reason why we put up the empty boxes is that it then is up to the bees to decide whether they wish to occupy those or not. And I think if that happens, then you're not going to overload a locality. Tom Seeley has worked out roughly how many colonies you should expect to find naturally in a given area of woodland or landscape, and we kind of keep an eye on that in terms of where we locate the boxes as well. We're not particularly interested in getting swarms from the beekeeper just a mile up the road, so we do try to choose places where we are pretty sure there's not too many beekeepers nearby. And it's interesting that some of the old woodlands that we've used, like Crum, one part of Florence Court and Temple Manor, it took a long time for the boxes to be occupied, which suggests that there's actually quite a lot of suitable, more natural hollow trees and old buildings around that the bees would find more attractive than our humble boxes.
Thank you.
Mark has his hand up there.
How's it going, David? I think it's me and you have talked on the phone
Yes.
about bees in this law.
That's right.
Yeah. Just wondering if you ever got a chance to go out and actually look at them. And if not, I was just noticing the tree there. The tree there is getting pretty bad with ash dieback, and I know there's a lot of talk about it going. But the bees are still in it. So I was kind of wondering if like a replacement box might be suitable for a situation whereby the tree had to fall.
Yes. Well, thanks for that, Mark. Yes, Mark, I do. You are on my to-do list.
Don't worry.
I would like to go and see them. Actually, this sort of weather would actually be quite good, because during much of July, the bees, I think, stayed at home. So now it's warmed up a wee bit, that the bees are more active. I think you've actually hit the nail on the head in relation to a very important issue. We've spotted this in Temple Manor as well, that the ash trees are dying on their feet, and either through collapse or by being removed. Sites that may have been in use for many, many years will be lost. By putting an empty box nearby, the chances of a colony migrating from a hive into an empty box is virtually nil. I haven't seen it. I think I've only seen once a colony leave one of my hives and go and occupy another empty hive. So it's very, very unusual that would happen. I think what we'd have to have some kind of controlled way of doing this, whereby if the tree was felled, then a couple of beekeepers suitably armed could go in and try and rescue the colony by putting it into retrieving the comb and as much of the bees as possible, and then leaving the replacement hive in situ where the tree stood, or else taking it away about more than 3 miles away. The bees would then reorientate to their new environment. So that's a kind of a doable proposition, but obviously requires the cooperation of the tree owner or the roadsides, the road service or whatever. But yes, I'll be in touch with you.
That's okay. I was just going to ask on the top of that. Coolbook, the Church of Ireland, Nisbla and Coolbook are looking to do more more biodiverse biodiversity stuff, and they had talked about putting up bee boxes,
Yes.
but I would rather see wild bee boxes than hives
Yes,
in
yes.
situ. So if that's something that you could maybe consider, I'm just planting the seed now in your heads rather than
Yes.
going on.
Well, look, that's fine. I live only a couple of miles from Book or less from Coolbuck, so we're delighted to do that with you. So either you get in touch with me about that, or ask Anne or somebody else to do so, and I'll make a box up over the winter. We can place it up next spring.
Perfect.
Well, that's excellent. If doesn't look as if there's any more questions or any more hands up. Well, if we take this to a close, but I just want to once again thanks Joshua, David, Noel, and all the participants, and a special shout out to Ashley, who is our technical person in LELP, because it's something I don't normally do. But it has been a really, really interesting evening, and again, I think on behalf of everybody that attended, you know, it really was amazing, and thank you very much to the three gentlemen for a fantastic talk and a walkthrough of everything from the reed beetles to the wild honeybees and everything else in between. Thank you very much, and it's something now that hopefully the listeners on board will take away and want to maybe further their learning, because it's something now that I really want to do, because it's been definitely amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So over to you, Ashley, now to sign off.